Welcome, seekers of truth. Get ready to explore the rare Wallace novel, As a Grain of Mustard Seed, where we dive into a gripping tale of faith, redemption, and the power of positive thinking. Chapter 1. A Stunning Blow. The church bells were ringing on a beautiful Sunday morning in June, and along the main street of Linton, the citizens, dressed in their best, were making their way toward the various houses of worship. Billy Stewart, coming out through the gate in front of his mother's cottage, glanced once up the street and once down, and then he hurried through the nearest alley, seeking a less frequented thoroughfare. It was strange behavior for a young man who had come home on the previous day from college, having graduated with honors. He was not going to church, and he could not bear to meet his friends, receive their congratulations, and answer their questions. For in the very hour of his triumph, the greatest trouble of his life had fallen upon him, and every hope he had cherished was blasted. He was dazed and benumbed by the shock, and he wanted to be alone. His father had been a photographer in Linton and had added something to his meager income by literary work. 5 years before, he had passed away, leaving his family almost without means of support and with a mortgage upon the little home. He had carried a small life insurance policy, and this he solemnly charged his wife to use in giving Billy a college education. It was his dearest hope that the boy might take to literature and rise to the fame and fortune which he himself had failed to attain. "Let the mortgage go," he said to his wife. "They will not press you for the payment of it. My insurance will keep you and Nellie for 5 years and pay Billy's expenses besides, and he can soon pay off the mortgage after he graduates." And she had faithfully executed his wishes. The boy had been dispatched to one of the best institutions of learning, and Nellie, the daughter, 2 years younger than her brother, had, upon coming out of high school, obtained a position in one of the banks of Linton, and by the mother's skillful management, they had lived comfortably until Billy's graduation. Upon coming home that Saturday evening, full of high hopes and ambitious plans for their future, the young fellow had been met by the stunning information that his sister was an embezzler to the amount of $10,000 and was in imminent danger of a long term in the penitentiary. It had come out in this way. About a year before, a brilliant young fellow named Gaylor had appeared in the town, coming no one knew whence. He had opened a real estate and insurance office, dealt in Western lands, and operated many business schemes, all apparently legitimate and promising. He had won, to some extent, the confidence of the solid men of the community, and his bright and engaging personality soon made him many friends among the younger people. Business brought him to Packett's bank, and he was instantly attracted by Nellie Stewart, beginning at once to pay especial attention to her. She fell deeply in love with him, and in a few months they became engaged. All went well until about 2 months before Billy's graduation, and then Gaylor came to Nellie one evening, apparently in great distress. He explained that by the failure of parties in whom he had trusted, he was short $10,000, which must be paid before noon on the following day, or an investment in which he had placed his whole capital would suffer absolute shipwreck, and that, while he had perfect assurance of getting the money 48 hours later, it would not come in time to save him. All the details need not be given here. His story was plausible, and he presented documents and letters which seemed ample proof, and he asked his betrothed wife to save him by secretly borrowing the required amount from the reserve funds of Packett's bank, in the certainty that the money could be returned before the loan was discovered. And she, believing and trusting and loving him as her own soul, did as he asked her. That night he disappeared, and by guarded inquiry, she learned that he had secretly made full preparations for going. No one knew whither he had gone, and no word came from him. And after a week of such agony as few women may endure and live, she went to her employer and confessed all, expecting instant arrest. Mr. Jason Packett, president of Packett's Bank, was generally considered, and not without reason, to be a hard man. He was scrupulously honest with his creditors and merciless and inflexible with his debtors. He really owned practically all the stock of the bank, but kept up the fiction of a board of directors so as to conveniently mask some of his foreclosure operations and shift the responsibility therefor. He was a bachelor of 50 and appeared to have but one aim in life, and that the accumulation of money. Knowing him, Nellie did not hope for mercy, and she was greatly surprised when, after listening with an impassive face to her story, he said, "Write out everything exactly as you have told it to me, and I will call on Lambert. You may sign and swear to it before him, and he can put on his notarial seal. He need not know what is in the paper. Then I will put the confession in my safe, and I will give you and your family 1 year in which to find Gaylor and get back my money. If you do that, I'll burn the paper and keep the secret. And if you don't get me the money by a year from today," he paused for an instant and seemed to master his rage with difficulty, "I'll take the confession into court and send you to the penitentiary for 20 years. You must have the money here before the bank closes on the 10th of next April, or up you go. Mark that, for I mean it," and she knew that he did. She told her mother now, and for fear of endangering Billy's graduation, the two women resolved to keep the matter secret until he came home. And so, upon his arrival, Mrs. Stewart had, with great tenderness, detailed to him the whole terrible story. And that was why, on this pleasant Sunday morning, the stalwart young fellow was plunging blindly along the back streets, avoiding everybody and intent only on getting where he might be quite alone. End of chapter. Chapter 2. The Mysterious Stranger. Presently he found the place he sought, the shade of a great oak which stood in an open field, a little beyond the outskirts of the town. There was no one in sight, and he threw himself on the grass with a sigh of relief. And, as he did so, the full consciousness of the horror of the situation seemed to come upon him for the first time, and he covered his face with his hands and burst into tears. "Nellie," he sobbed. "Nellie, my playmate, my dear little sister, to go prison? Oh, my God, my God." And for some time, his emotion was uncontrollable. Then he grew calmer and, sitting up with his back against the tree, began to try to think of a way out of the difficulty. He thought of instituting a search for Gaylor and dismissed the idea almost as soon as it came to him. No one knew anything of the fellow's past history. He had left the town without leaving a trace of the way he had gone, and with his 2-month start, Billy felt that pursuit was useless. And whatever search was made must be carried on secretly, for the knowledge of Nellie's mistake, he would call it by no worse name, must not be made public. Once the matter became known, he knew the officers of the law would be in duty bound to arrest the girl, and Packett could not shield her, even if he should be disposed to do so. The course the banker had taken in the matter was puzzling at best. The granting of a year of grace was not at all like Packett, and Billy could not understand why he had not at once clapped Nellie into jail and started a hue and cry after Gaylor. The young man suspected some hidden motive, but as to what it might be, he could form no conjecture which seemed even reasonable. "Oh, if they had only telegraphed me on the very next day after Gaylor left," he muttered, "I might have traced him, but it is too late now. There is only one way. I must raise the money myself." And he laughed bitterly at the thought. All their possessions would bring but a few $100s more than enough to pay off the mortgage on the cottage. And how should he, a penniless young fellow, raise $10,000 within a year? Or, to be exact, within 10 months? Certainly, the case was hopeless. Nellie was lost. There was nothing of blame or reproach in his thoughts of his sister, only a great tenderness and pity as he thought of her haggard face and of his sorrowful eyes, which told of her days and nights of suffering. And then he thought of his mother. "Oh," he cried aloud, "if I only had her faith! How can she feel so calm and so assured that everything will come out right?" He recalled how, on the previous evening, she sat with his hand in hers and with Nellie's head in her lap, and she had talked quietly, brightly, and with perfect assurance of their future and of the time when all their difficulties should be overcome. She had declared that Nellie would be saved from prison and from public disgrace, and she had said it with such unfaltering confidence that he had marveled at her, knowing that her faith was genuine. He sat thinking for a long time, and at last rose with a sigh and turned his face toward the town. "It looks mighty dark to me," he said. "I guess it's up to Mother to pull us through, if we make it." And he went slowly home. Arriving there, he found his mother sitting by the window, reading one of her favorite New Thought books. She looked up as he entered, and he marveled again at the peace and brightness of her welcoming smile. She was 45, but her dark hair was without a thread of gray, and her face and form were those of a very handsome woman of 30. Nellie sat on a sofa near her mother, and Billy's first act on coming into the room was to take the girl's pale face between his hands and kiss her. Then he sat down beside her, with his arm around her waist. Not a word of reproof had been spoken to the girl by either her mother or brother. She had met with only increased tenderness from both of them. This made her burden easier to bear, but still, it was almost beyond her strength, and her white face and heavy eyes bore eloquent testimony to the keenness of her sorrow. "Mother," said Billy, "I've come to you to be braced up. Increase my faith and tell me how to go to work to get us out of the scrape we are in." "Billy," she said, "why do you consider the situation so hopeless?" "Well, we have $10,000 to raise within 10 months. Doesn't that look hopeless?" "Did you ever know of one making a similar amount of money in the same time, Billy?" "Sure, and much more. Tom Bartlett's brother was down from New York at commencement, and I met him. He has made nearly $2,000 a week for 6 months on the royalties of his play, Mr. McGugan. It must have paid him $30,000 clear of everything." "You say you met him, Billy? Now, is his head 5 times as large as yours?" "No, Mother. He trod on my hat and went into it, ears and all." And is his conversation 5 times as brilliant and profound as yours? Has he 5 times your education and attainments?" "No, he's just a mighty plain, common-appearing, good fellow." "Billy, is there anything in him which is not in you?" "I don't think there is, Mother. No, there can't be. You have told me, often enough, that we are all made of the same stuff and have the same powers and possibilities, and I know that it is true. But of course, there are differences in development." "Well, Billy, you and this young man have had substantially the same training and at the same school. Do you believe that his literary talent has been developed vastly beyond your own?" "No, Mother. There is something in this young man which, applied to the work of writing plays, has made him $30,000 in 6 months. You admit that that same something is in you and that you have the power to apply it in the same way, and yet you believe that it is quite impossible for you to make $10,000 in 10 months. End of chapter. Chapter 3. Some Questions in Science. For some moments, Billy sat in silence, staring at the floor and considering his mother's last remark. Then he struck his fist heavily upon his knee and looked up at her with the light of a new conviction in his face. "You are right, Mother," said he. "Bartlett told me he only worked 4 months on his play. I can write a successful play in 3 months, and I will. Then I shall still have time to market it. Although he may have had the best of me there, for he no doubt has influential friends to push his work upon the consideration of theatrical managers." "Well, so have you, Billy," said his mother quietly. "Have I? Who are they, Mother dear?" "There is an infinite friend," she said, "who is able and willing to impress managers favorably in regard to your work. This friend is that great intelligence, who is in all and through all, moving ever toward more life to all. The Supreme Mind, Billy, can inspire you with the right words to put into your play, can bring you to the person who will buy it, and can impress that person to examine and consider it carefully. The most powerful of all influences is always at your service and at the service of every person who desires to advance in a larger life." "I believe in a Supreme," said Billy, "but he, or it, seems rather vague and unreal to me. And I believe that he could impress other people favorably for me. He must be able to do that, if he has any power at all. But how may I be sure that he is willing to do so? You say that you believe he can give to others a favorable impression of you and your work. Now, can he do that unless you have first given him a favorable impression?" Said Billy. "The Supreme can give to others," said Mrs. Stewart quietly, "only what we have impressed upon it. And remember that the impression is made upon the Supreme by faith alone. If you have faith in yourself and your work, Billy, that faith will be transmitted to the Supreme. And as the Supreme is in contact with all, faith in you and your work will be transmitted all. You can have faith in yourself when you know that your mental power is unlimited and that you intend to use it rightly. And you can have faith in your work if you know that it is well done and that it will make for good to all who are affected by it. But how can I make this supreme power take notice of me or of my work? Nothing can be either great or small to the Supreme, and being in all, he must take notice of all, and his purpose, as revealed to us in evolution and in all his works, is the continuous advancement of life into larger and more complete living. The earth is formed to promote more abundant living in all and by all. Life itself is the Supreme, moving toward fuller expression, which means more complete life. So you can see, Billy, that when we begin to move forward, the mightiest of all forces is with us and for us, and we cannot fail. But, Mother, there are many reformers who are honestly working to give more abundant life to all, and they fail, or seem to. How do you account for that? You speak wisely, Billy, when you say they seem to fail. No effort toward the good is ever really lost. But there are many reformers who do not accomplish as much as they wish because they try to confine the Supreme to some particular channel. They wish to have him throw himself into their movement to the exclusion of all others. And we need to get rid of the notion that those we call reformers are in some special sense servants of God. Often, they are merely officious meddlers who are actuated by prejudice. There is really but one way to serve God, and that is by living a full and complete life. God is life, and we can serve life only by living. Mother, you've been practicing all this for 5 years or more. Tell us why this trouble has come upon us? Hasn't your philosophy failed you? Not at all. No trouble has come upon us, unless we make trouble of it. Every action produces a reaction, and as we begin to move forward, the reaction from our own movement causes what appear to be opposing powers to array themselves against us. But these forces, no matter how tremendous they may seem, are only appearances, for there is really only one force, and that is the will of the Supreme. When we hold steadily to this truth and move forward, all opposition must disappear. In a chapter. Chapter 4. The work begins. I can see where your faith is grounded, Mother, said the young man, and I believe that you are right. I know you are. Furthermore, I know that I can write a successful play. Nothing has ever been so well done that it may not be done better. Better dramas than even those of Shakespeare are possible. And why should I not write them? We will take your word for it. This combination of circumstances is only to call out the best there is in us. We will rest today, and tomorrow I will jump into the great work. Mother, said Nellie, speaking for the first time, do you believe that one person may reach and impress another through the Supreme? Yes, dear. I know that it is possible. Do you believe, that is it possible, could I so impress the mind of Frederick Gaylor as to turn him back to truth and righteousness? The girl's voice trembled, and her eyes were full of tears. It was the first time she had mentioned her lover since she told her mother the story of his baseness. Billy set his teeth hard and clenched his fist. His heart was full of bitterness toward Gaylor. There have been many well-authenticated cases, said Mrs. Stewart, in which men's whole lives have been changed, apparently in answer to fervent prayers offered for them by others. How could this be done, except by impressing their minds through the Supreme? I know of one instance in which a mother prayed for her wayward boy who was far from home, and in the very hour of her prayer, his heart was changed, and he forsook his wild ways and turned toward the truth. She believed that it was the work of some outside power, moved to action by her prayer. But was it not really her own faith, acting through the Supreme, conveyed to and impressed upon her boy's mind through the Supreme? That, said Billy, throws some light on absent treatment. I never believed in it, but I can see that there might be something in it after all. The case of Frederick Gaylor, Mrs. Stewart went on, is not hard to understand. I studied him carefully when he began to go with Nellie, and I liked him very much. He is a magnificent fellow, talented and lovable. Then what the dickens, began Billy, but his mother checked him by lifting a finger. I once knew a splendid businessman, she said, who was what is called a periodical drinker. In his normal state, he abhorred drink, but at long intervals, 3 to 6 months, an overwhelming thirst would come upon him. He could not control it, and would go upon a spree lasting several days. There was no physical or physiological reason for the recurrence of these attacks. They were caused by an impression deeply held in the subconscious mind. This was proved when the man was cured by suggestion. The positive affirmation of a hypnotist that he would never feel the desire for drink again wrought the cure. Now, I think poor Frederick Gaylor is the victim of a similar subconscious impression. He is what one might call a periodical criminal, and it only needs the persistent affirmation of honesty and righteousness to work a cure in his case. Affirm for him, dear, every day. Do not pray that he may become honest and love the right, but affirm that he does love right and truth with all his heart and mind and soul. Put the power of absolute faith in your affirmation, and I will join you. You shall win him to truth. Billy coughed dubiously and presently changed the subject by beginning a story of his college life. So, the next morning, Billy began with great enthusiasm to fit up his room as a literary workshop, and he soon had it arranged to his liking. His mother and Nellie assisted in the work, beautifying the little room in every possible way, Mrs. Stewart saying as she worked. Every mental worker should make his workshop as beautiful and pleasant as he possibly can. His work cannot fail to be the better for the suggestions coming from lovely surroundings. And really, this should be true of all workers. Money could not be better invested than in beautifying and making pleasant the factories and workshops where the masses of the people work with their hands for daily bread. Art and beauty should receive as much consideration in building a factory as in building a church. Their means were small, and their accessories simple and inexpensive. But nevertheless, when Billy sat down at his desk to begin his great work, he looked about the little room with satisfaction. Everything in it seemed to radiate cheerfulness and hope, and to give him new strength and confidence. If every literary worker had a mother, sister, or wife to fix him up like this, he said, there would be a larger percentage of success. And perhaps he was right. He had first to consider the problem of getting a living while he should be writing the play. And this was instantly taken out of his hands by Nellie herself, who went to Langham's, the one department store of Linton, and secured a position as bookkeeper at a good salary. We do not have rent to pay, she said when she came home that evening, and the garden furnishes most of our living. My wages will keep us nicely through the summer. So please, Mr. Shakespeare, give all your time and talent to the drama. The bread and butter questions shall not intrude itself upon you. Good, said Billy. I will lay out a certain amount of work to be done each day, and do it. If you do that, said his mother quietly, your play will be a failure. Why, mother? Because you cannot beat your best, mentally, under stress or compulsion. If you feel that you are driven or hurried, or that you must accomplish a certain amount of work each day, you will not be in the poised, balanced, confident state of mind which is essential to success. You cannot beat your best, mentally, when you're anxious, hurried, or doubtful of results. In these states of mind, you cannot have that faith which draws upon the supreme. You must dismiss all thoughts of time or of necessity, and think only of the one fact that your work is to be perfect. If you do not write more than one sentence in a day, work upon that sentence until you know that it is right before you leave it. If you do that, you cannot fail to produce a great work. But remember that the greatest works are done only when we are in the mental attitude of poise. And poise is the peaceful consciousness of power. Billy gave full weight to all that his mother said, and set about his work in a more deliberate spirit. He gave several days to finding a name and outlining a plot for his play, finally deciding that the title should be The Joy of Going On, and that the motive should be to set forth the possibilities in a life of continuous advancement toward higher planes. And having definitely decided upon this, he settled down to work. But first, without informing either his mother or sister, he sent the following personal to one of the leading New York dailies, knowing that no one in Linton was likely to see it, and that only his own family and Packett would understand its meaning, in any case. Personal, F.G. They have given her until the 10th of April to return the full amount, and if not done, they will prosecute. If you are a man, you will help to save her. W.S. End of chapter. Chapter 5. The work goes on. A busy month soon passed, and then another. The play was rapidly taking form now. Billy was working on the final copying, going slowly and with care, and yet with confidence, for he felt that his work was good. He had written Bartlett, the playwright, and that gentleman had promptly offered his assistance, bringing the work before the managers and theatrical people of the city. "Finish your work carefully," he wrote to Billy, "and then come on here. I will introduce you to the people you want to see." All things seemed to be working for Billy's good, and his confidence grew as the days went by. His mother went about her duties, serene and cheerful. Her faith sustained both her children when discouragement threatened them. Twice, every day, she retired to her own room for meditation and to utter the prayer and affirmations which expressed her faith, and from these seasons of retirement, she always emerged with a shining and confident face. No expression of doubt or anxiety ever crossed her lips. Her unwavering constancy to her belief in the all-good was wonderful. Only one thing tended to disturb her, and that was the behavior of Mr. Jason Packett, who seemed to watch her unceasingly. In church, or when they met in any public place, he never took his eyes off her. His keen gazes seemed to take note of every movement that she made. At last, one day, when he knew that she was alone, he called at the cottage to assure her of his unshaken intention to prosecute her daughter to the limit of the law if the full amount of his loss was not made up to him on the day that he had set. She assured him that every dollar of his money would be forthcoming, and he went away somewhat mystified by her confidence. He did not know what Billy was doing, and would not have believed in the possibility of the works providing the needed sum if he had. She did not mention his visit to Nellie, but she told Billy, and they were both puzzled by the banker's action. "I wonder," said Billy, "if he merely wanted the fun of playing with us, as a cat would play with a family of mice, or has he some purpose which he will declare later? There's an African in this woodpile somewhere, Mother." "Never mind, Billy," said she. "He can do us no harm, even should he be disposed to do so, and let us have faith that he is not. Let us believe that he honestly means to do what is best for all of us. I think he does. He hasn't a record for doing things that way," said Billy. "Men," said Mrs. Stewart, "are very apt to do to us what we think they are going to do. It is the reactionary effect of our own mental attitude toward them. Have faith in the justice and generosity of Mr. Packett, Billy, and that faith will call out those very qualities in him. There is no other way in which we can so uplift and ennoble any man as by having faith in him. To have faith in Packett's generosity, Mother, would be like believing in an extinct something which never existed. But it was generosity, Billy, which led him to give us this whole year's time. What else?" And not being able to assign any other reason, Billy was obliged to accept her conclusion. Something else happened at this time, which gave him food for thought. It was on a Sunday morning, and he was sitting with his mother in the living room when Nellie came down, and both of them were instantly struck by a great change in the girl's appearance. The haggard and sorrowful look was gone from her face. Her eyes were dancing, and there was color in her cheek. She was smiling as brightly as of old. She saw the wonder in their faces, and without waiting to be questioned, told them what had happened. She had been standing at her window on the previous evening, making her nightly prayer and affirmation for her recreant lover, repeating over and over with passionate earnestness that he was honest and true, and that he loved the truth with all his soul. And suddenly she had felt an absolute assurance that what she said was true, and there had fallen upon her a great peace and confidence, and a certainty that all was well, both with Frederick Gaylor and herself. So overpowering had been this feeling of assurance that she had ceased her intensely earnest affirmations and burst out into joyful thanksgivings, thanking God with all her heart that he had heard her prayers and that her lover had been turned into the right way. She had gone to bed and slept soundly, and had awakened in the morning filled with the same serene confidence and peace. And her calm faith in the divine goodness seemed now to be fully equal to that of her mother. "All is good," she said to Billy, "and whatever comes will, in the end, be best for us. I have been secretly doubtful and afraid, Billy dear, but I am so no longer. I have only one trouble now. I think Mr. Langham wishes to marry me. He is a good and noble man, but I do not love him, and it pains me to discourage his advances, as I must." Langham, the proprietor of the department store, was a widower of 40, a splendid gentleman, and reputed to be a millionaire. Billy drew a long breath. "It might be a way out," he said hesitatingly. "That is, if we fail." "Billy," said his mother quietly, "we shall not fail. But if we begin to consider other means than those we have set out ourselves to bring about, do you not see how we might divide our forces, and perhaps lose all? It would be wrong for Nellie to marry a man whom she does not love, merely to escape from something which might be more disagreeable. And we must remember the law by which we are seeking to attain. If we have faith, we will not turn aside to consider other means than those with which we have set to work." "Right you are, Mother," said Billy promptly. "We must do what we have started to do, and I can see, now, how these other opportunities might be merely snares of the enemy, so to speak. And I believe that most people who fail in life do so just by letting themselves get sidetracked in that very way. Yes, Billy, success is a matter of keeping on the main track. We must learn, however, to judge wisely the different means and opportunities as they present themselves, for it will not do to neglect any which tend to advance us in the line we are pursuing. Many people fail by concentrating so intensely upon one thing that they neglect the supplementary branches of that thing. They're too narrow in their concentration. They focus their minds to too fine a point. Just as a river has its thousands of small tributaries and grows by gathering them all into one stream, so there are always tributaries of power flowing into our undertakings, and it is vitally important that we should gather every one into the mainstream. The one thing needful is to distinguish between those opportunities which converge and those which diverge. When, as in the present case, what seems like another way out is shown to us, we should ask ourselves the question, will it divide my mind if I consider this? And if it will, we must reject it. Apply this test to your suggestion, Billy. If you hold the thought that Mr. Langham's preference for Nellie might be a way out in case you fail, then you're holding the thought of failure in connection with your own work, and you will convey to the Supreme, instead of the impression of faith, that of distrust and fear. You will work in the spirit of distrust and fear, and your work will be stamped with it. Under such conditions, you may produce work which will be intellectually good, but it will lack that vital spiritual quality which goes with absolute faith, and which really makes success. And besides lacking faith, you will fail to impress the Supreme with the idea of success for you. Instead, you will impress it with failure, and you will have that contrary impression to overcome at every step. I see. Mother, we must burn our bridges behind us. Or I must be single. Yes. Take Nellie's case as another instance. If she considers Mr. Langham's love, she must make her affirmations for Frederick Gaylor with a divided mind and with no real faith, and so fail to save him. But suppose, Mother, that the new way out looks to be better and more practical than the one we have been following? That may happen. Sometimes we are brought to a place where a new and better way is available. And when our best judgment tells us that this is the case, we should not hesitate either to let go of the old way or to make it entirely secondary and subsidiary to the new. The main thing to remember is that we must not allow our minds to be divided between the old way and the new. Mrs. Stewart was very soon to be called upon to apply this philosophy in her own personal case, for on the following day she received this letter. My dear Mrs. Stewart, it has occurred to me that we might arrange our whole trouble in a most satisfactory manner. I am getting tired of living alone, and perhaps you are too. Now, why should you not marry me? If you will, you may do as you like with the paper you know of. I am in no hurry for a decision. Say nothing about this to anybody, but take your time to think it over. No answer is required to this note. I will call when you have had plenty of time for consideration. Very truly yours, Jason Packett. End of chapter. Chapter 6. Frederick Gaylor. It was nearly midnight on the 1st of September when Nellie had the spiritual experience related in the last chapter. And earlier in the same evening, a handsome, well-dressed young fellow was sitting at a table in a gambling room in one of the southern cities of the United States. Presently, he rose with a laugh. My last dollar, he said to the dealer, and the last of 10,000 you have raked in within a month. The other took a $100 bill from a pile at his side and passed it across the table. Take that toward a new start, Fred, said he, and when you have made another pile, come back and try me again. The young man picked up the bill, stuffing it carelessly into his pocket, and, yawning, left the room and the house. At a fruit stand on the street, he paused and, finding some loose change in his pocket, made a purchase. The dealer, with a word of apology, wrapped it in a newspaper. Reaching his room, the young fellow was about to cast this aside when he noticed that it was a recent issue of a daily printed in a northern city, and while eating his lunch, he looked it over curiously. Suddenly, his form stiffened and his face turned very pale. His eye had fallen on the following advertisement. Personal, FG. They have given her until the 10th of April to return the full amount, and if not done, they will prosecute. If you are a man, you will help save her. WS. The paper fell from his hand, and he sat for several minutes, staring blankly through the window into the darkness of the night. They will prosecute, he muttered. Yes, of course, Packett will prosecute. He will send her to the penitentiary. If she had just kept silent, he could never have proved it, but I suppose she went straight to him and confessed. Dear, honest little thing. He arose and went to the window and stood looking at the stars. It was the very hour when Nellie, hundreds of miles away, was also gazing into the heavens and pouring out her whole soul in prayer and affirmation for him. I've done some dirty things, he cried aloud, but this is the worst of all. Poor, faithful girl, how she trusted me, and they will send her to the penitentiary for life. A horror beyond expression fell upon him, and he clung to the window casing for support. My God, he cried in a voice of anguish. My God, it will never do. She must be saved. I've got to save her, and I will. God. He raised his face again toward the stars. Hear me and help me. I've been a cursed scoundrel, but from this instant I'll be a man. I'll never do another mean act. I'll never wrong another soul. And I'll save Nellie. Help me, God. Help me to find a way to make $10,000 before the 1st of April. I'll make right what I've done. I'll save her or I'll die. He fell back into a chair and sat for a time, trembling with emotion. Great drops of sweat stood on his forehead. An hour passed before he grew calm enough to think intelligently. An hour of intense misery, for he seemed to be in the grasp of some powerful inward force, which, while impelling him strongly toward righteousness, yet held up his past sins before him in all their naked hideousness. Often he groaned or cried out in horror and self-abasement at the pictures which were brought forward in his memory. But through it all, there was steadily welling up from within him a great and overmastering purpose, the will to do right. The subconscious depths of his soul had been reached and awakened by the prayers and affirmation of the gentle girl who had suffered so cruelly at his hands, and the quickened soul was asserting its power. He was another man. After a long time spent in thought, with occasional lapses into bitter self-reproach, he arose with a look of resolution on his face. I will go back to the mines of Arizona, he said half aloud. I know of no other place which offers such hope of making a fortune in a few months. This $100 Jake gave me will carry me there, and leave a little for a start. I'll catch the first train. And arising, he began hastily to pack his clothing. The 10th day afterward found him in a mining camp in the far southwest, working feverishly among 100 others, but with small success. An occasional rich strike was made on some of the claims in the gulch. One man, on the claim adjoining Gaylor's, found a pocket of gold containing a fortune, and the finds were frequent enough to keep them all in a fever of expectancy. But most of the claims yielded little more than enough to sustain their owners from day to day, and Gaylor's was of this class. He worked hard, far harder than any of the men around him, and he lived very sparingly. But still, the gold in the buckskin sack buried in his shack increased with a slowness that, to him, was terrible. But he toiled on eagerly, hoping each day for the possible strike, which would give him the means to save the girl he had wronged from the cruel fate which threatened her. He knew that there were no other diggings which promised better than the spot where he was, and that there was little likelihood of his bettering his chances by moving to another camp. At night, when the other men gambled, drank, and caroused, he sat in his cabin thinking only of his one great purpose. Neither cards nor liquor tempted him in the least. All desire for the pleasures which had formerly ruled his life had been swept away by the mighty longing for truth and righteousness, which had so suddenly swept up from within him on the night when Nellie had made her supreme effort in faithful prayer. Christmas came and passed. Weeks slipped away, and it was the 1st of March. He had only been able to save $200, and he began to despair. Only a month, he reflected one night, sitting in the door of his shanty. Only a month and $10,000 to make. I've got to make a change. There is no fortune in this claim of mine. Even as these thoughts passed through his mind, he heard a sound on the bluff above him, as of some heavy body being dragged slowly over the ground. And after listening for a moment, he arose and stepped out into the moonlight. His cabin was the last of the row which formed the main street of the camp. It stood at some little distance from the others, and he was quite alone. But as the miners were generally peaceful and law-abiding, he felt no fear. "Who's there?" he called as the sound was repeated. A groan, which sounded as if someone might be suffering extreme pain, was the answer, and then a weak voice called, "Help!" End of chapter. Chapter 7. Selling a play. So, in due time, Billy Stewart went to New York with the completed manuscript of his play, and Bartlett, the playwright, having read it carefully, became enthusiastic over the work. "You've done a big thing, Billy," said he a little enviously. "You have told something the world needs to know, and done it without spoiling your play. I've never been able to do it myself. I've tried 1 or 2 plays that taught, and no one would consider them at all. But this one will go, and we'll begin a call on the managers tomorrow. We will take our time and find a man who will treat you exactly right, even if we don't get the play brought out before next year." Billy shook his head at this. "I must get the play put on right away," said he. "It must bring me $10,000 before the 1st of next April." It was now September, but with all their enthusiasm, the matter dragged. The first manager to whom they submitted the play kept it about 10 days, and then reported that, while it was very good, he was so bound by a contract with another author that he could not produce it for a long time to come. And the second one, after reading it himself, asked leave to submit it to his leading lady, who took 6 precious weeks for consideration, and then rejected the leading part with scorn unless it should be entirely rewritten along lines she suggested, which would have quite spoiled all the rest of the play. This brought them to the 1st of November. 2 more months were gone, and Billy was getting uneasy, although he concealed the fact from his mother. Bartlett now suggested that they should try Aronson, a Hebrew manager, who had a large theater in the city and kept several companies on the road as well. "We ought to have gone to him at first," he said to Billy. "It is always better to try out a play in the smaller cities before putting it on here." Aronson was a fat man who wore much jewelry, and whose hair was very black and very curly. He was courteous, but brisk and decisive. He glanced hurriedly over the play and seemed to be impressed with it. "You go home," he said to Billy, "and let me have a week to look this over and read it to my company. And if it is what it looks to be, we will put it on as soon as they can learn their parts." And with this arrangement, the young man was compelled to be content. They went out of the manager's office into the theater, where the company had just finished a rehearsal, and Bartlett introduced Billy to several members of the troupe, notably the leading lady and a young actress whose name was Esther Jane. With these 2 ladies, the 2 young men became engaged in an animated conversation, and the matter ended in their going out to dinner together. "Tell us something about your play," said the star to Billy, as they sat down at the table. "We play here 2 more weeks, and then Aronson will put us out on one of his circuits. And if he likes your work, he will give it to us to try out in the one-night stands." So he gave them an outline of the plot of his drama, and somewhat to his surprise, both girls appeared to fully comprehend and appreciate his ideas. "So, you are a metaphysician," said Miss Jane. "Please don't," said Billy. "I do not like to have people call me names, especially when I don't know what they mean." "I don't like the term mental scientist," said she. "The words have too many meanings. But the word metaphysician means something beyond the physical, and anything pertaining to the power of mind over matter is metaphysics. It's a sort of sacred subject with me, Mr. Stewart. All that I am, which is very little, and all that I hope to be, which is very much indeed, I owe to practical metaphysics, and to practicing exactly what you teach in your play." "Indeed," cried Billy. He took more notice of her now and saw that she was a very pretty young woman with a remarkably bright and intelligent countenance. "I'm following an ideal," she said, "and that, and nothing else, has led me up from the lowest beginnings to playing second parts, and I will have a star's role next year. All things are possible to those who believe, Mr. Stewart. If we have faith in our work, faith in ourselves, and have faith in faith, nothing can prevent us from doing what we wish to do and becoming what we wish to become." Billy was greatly surprised. He noted that she used none of the stagey slang he had heard from the others of the company, and that while perfectly assured, her manner was very quiet and ladylike. She interested him greatly, and he frankly told her so. "And please tell me what you mean by having faith in faith," he finished. "Why," said she, "that is the heart of the whole matter. Faith in faith is the keystone to the structure. What use to have faith unless you believe that faith has power? It is like believing in a God who is powerless. But suppose you have perfect faith in faith, and then suppose you realize that you have faith, don't you see that you become invincible? Such a man has power to summon all that there is in the infinite to his assistance, and he cannot fail to get what he wants." "The infinite?" put in Bartlett. "What is the infinite? And how do you know that there is one, Miss Jane? I do not believe in anything I cannot understand." "Do you understand yourself?" she asked. "Do you know any more about your own mind than you do about the infinite? Can you explain your own mind and account for it?" "No." "Do you believe you have one?" "Stone," said Billy gleefully, as Bartlett hesitated. "He has his doubts about it, and so do his friends. Go right on with your metaphysics, Miss Jane." He won't interrupt again. "Tell me what it is we can draw from the infinite. I confess to being hazy on that point myself." End of chapter. Chapter 8. Aronson's Treachery. Miss Jane put her elbows on the table and rested her chin on her bent fingers. Her eyes were very bright, and her cheeks flushed with enthusiasm. "All things in the beginning came forth from one eternal, original, perfectly fluid substance," said she, "and all things that exist are continually being dissolved and received into that substance. Do you believe that?" They assented. "Then," she went on, "if all existing things are continually being dissolved and disintegrated, new things must be continually formed. That is, a great procession of forms continually moves out from the original formless substance, and as continually dissolves back into it. The infinite contains, then, all things that are to be. So what is there that it cannot give us? Do you believe that this formless substance is conscious, that it is intelligent? Surely, it is the only intelligence. And how may we connect ourselves with it, so as to get what we want? We are always in connection with it, but not consciously, and this unconscious or subconscious connection is peculiarly close when we sleep. In sleep, some part of us, and it must be the subconscious mind, comes into such close touch with the infinite that it receives the vital power which is to sustain us during the day, and it may receive anything else that we ask for. For instance, when I lay down to sleep, if I have a particularly effective or difficult part to play on the next night, I first try to get in touch with my own subconscious mind. I think that there's a fine mental body which permeates my physical form as water permeates a sponge. And I think of this mental body until it seems to me that I can feel it. Then I speak to it as to a person, something in this fashion. Tomorrow night when I go on the stage, I want you to give me these lines, and here I repeat them. Give them to me with such power that every person in the audience shall be thrilled. Give me perfect gestures and manner. Make me perfect in the impersonation and the part. I repeat this until I feel sure that I have impressed it upon the subconscious, and then I go to sleep with perfect faith. It never fails. I know there is power in your acting." "All right," said Bartlett thoughtfully. "Pity we playwrights can't use that process in our business, Billy." "You can," said Miss Jane quietly. "If there is a certain actor's scene or situation you want to write out the following day, tell the subconscious, as you're going to sleep, to give it to you in the best possible form. It will do so." "I get some inkling," said Billy, "as to how such things might be. But, Miss Jane, how could the subconscious give us substantial things, material things, food, money, and clothes, for instance? By its connection with the infinite, it can cause them to be brought to us, or cause us to go to them. No matter what you want, charge the subconscious to get it for you, and you will receive if your faith is perfect. You would hardly believe that a man who had never heard of me, and of whom I had never heard, came from New Orleans to New York to bring me a book which contained certain information which I just had to have. But it is so. I had charged the subconscious to give me the knowledge. And a few days later, this man's business affairs suddenly took such shape that he could make great profit by coming to New York. In leaving home, he was impressed to bring the book. When he reached this city, certain other people were so impressed that he and I were introduced to each other, and our conversation turned on the things I wished to know. He gave me the book and went away, never dreaming that he had been an instrument in the hands of power outside himself. But I understood it all. Cannot you see that anything might be given to us in the same way? They were all silent for a moment, considering her argument. Billy Stewart was strongly attracted to this girl, in whom he saw a faith which seemed to rival that of his mother. He took her to her home after the dinner, and on the way told her of his mother, and something of himself. And when they parted, he asked permission to call on her whenever he might be in the city. "I shall be glad to see you at any time, before our company takes the road," she said. "You're not at all like the men who usually want to get acquainted with actresses. Come and see me whenever you can, Mr. Stewart." He went home to Linton to await Aronson's verdict on the play. And when 3 days of the week of consideration which the manager had asked for had passed, he was startled by receiving the following telegram. "Beat the stage door tonight, 7:30. Show this, and come to my dressing room. Esther Jane." He had barely time to catch the fast train for the city, and he acted instantly, although he was greatly puzzled by the message. Miss Jane had completely won his confidence, and he felt that there was something in the matter of vital importance to him. He was at the stage door of Aronson's theater at the appointed hour, and the doorkeeper, after glancing at the telegram, admitted him and directed him to the actress's dressing room. He found her seated before her mirror, arranging her hair in a peculiar style demanded by her part. She greeted him without embarrassment, and he noticed again that she was beautiful and that there was a frank comradeship about her manner which was very winning. Her first words, however, put everything else out of his mind. "Aronson is trying to steal your play," she said, "and he will, unless you save it within the next half hour." End of chapter. Chapter 9. A business arrangement. "Trying to steal my play?" cried Billy in blank astonishment. "Ow! It must be a splendid thing," said Miss Jane, "and the temptation has been too much for him. This morning at rehearsal, I came off the stage and heard him talking to one Eckstein, a Jew newspaper man, and a sharp, unprincipled fellow. There was only a canvas scene between us, and, as I stepped up to it, I heard Aronson mention your name in the play, so I eavesdropped, suspecting something wrong. 'What's the use,' he said, 'of letting this young fellow rake in this money? We may as well have it all.' And then they planned that Eckstein should take your manuscript and make notes from it, and write another play embodying all the best points of yours. Aronson is to make some suggestions to you as to alterations, which will keep you busy for some time, and in the meanwhile, they will put on the other play. When you come up with your manuscript, they will accuse you of plagiarism. Aronson was to bring the manuscript to his office here this evening, and Eckstein is to call for it at 8. It is nearly time. Go straight to Aronson's office and demand your manuscript. Do not tell him that I told you all this, unless you must, but get your manuscript at any cost. Come to me here as soon as the curtain falls on the last act." He thanked her with a few earnest words and a warm pressure of the hand, and hurried out, going directly to the manager's office. Aronson was sitting at his desk, and standing before him was a slim young man with dark eyes and curly hair, a duplicate of the manager, except in portliness. Aronson looked blankly astonished when Billy walked unceremoniously into the room, but he quickly recovered himself and suavely introduced Mr. Eckstein. "Mr. Aronson," said Billy, "have you read my play yet?" He saw a look of comprehension pass between the two men. "Sorry to say I haven't had the time, Mr. Stewart," said Aronson. "Must you go, Eckstein?" This to the newspaper man, who was moving toward the exit. Billy stepped quickly to the door and placed his back against it. "No, Mr. Eckstein mustn't go," said he. "Not till I get my manuscript." "Why? Your manuscript is at my hotel," cried Aronson. "Is it?" said Billy shortly. "Then what is Mr. Eckstein hiding under his coat?" He caught the slim little reporter by the shoulder and gave him a shake, at some apparent risk of breaking the fellow's neck, and a bulky package tumbled to the floor. With a final shaking, which made the Hebrew's arms and legs gyrate like those of a jumping jack, Billy tossed Eckstein into a corner and picked up the package. He saw at once that it was his manuscript. "This is what I came for," said he. "Good evening, gentlemen. Sorry to inconvenience you, Mr. Eckstein, but I needed this paper." He turned toward the door. "Wait," cried Aronson, springing to his feet. "Main Gott, man, don't go away mad." His pronunciation suffered in his excitement, and his face was really comical in its distress. "Why, that's a great play," he went on. "There's thousands in it, Mr. Stewart. Thousands. Don't get excited. No one has robbed you. You have your play. Just stop and let us talk a little." "Thank you," said Billy, "but I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Aronson, except to tell you that you are a rascal." He turned toward the door again. "Oh, yes, yes," said Aronson. "Of course I am a rascal. So is everybody, Mr. Stewart. But look here, I can bring out your play better than any other man in New York all the same. Now, we can make a contract that will make you safe, quite safe. You can copyright the play yourself and have a representative in the company to see that your interests are perfectly attended to. And we will put the play on right away. I'm caught, Mr. Stewart. I'll own up, but that needn't stop us from doing business. There's no harm done except to Eckstein, and he needed a dusting anyway." He stood rubbing his hands and smiling up at Billy with anxious deprecation, and his impudent assurance was too much for the young man's gravity. He burst out laughing, and Aronson felt that he was yielding. In fact, an inspiration had come to the playwright, and a purpose had suddenly formed in his mind. "Look here," he said, "I'm going out to find Miss Jane and ask her to take supper with me after the play. I would like her to hear our contract, if we make one, and you can go along with us. I'll let you pay for the supper," he added as an afterthought. Aronson made a wry face. "Oh, well," said he, "if I must, I must. Shake Eckstein again, Mr. Stewart. Maybe the price of the supper will fall out of his clothes." "Oh, Aronson can pay it," said Eckstein, "and without being out a cent. If he buys you and Miss Jane a supper tonight, she'll find the whole bill taken from her pay next Saturday." The two rascals were so perfectly unabashed that Billy could only marvel at their brazen hardihood, and he hurried out to seek Miss Jane, finding her just ready to go upon the stage. He told her what had happened. "Aronson is going out to supper with you and me," he said. "I took the liberty to make the appointment because I wish you to hear what he has to say, and I have a scheme which concerns you. Will you be ready to go with us as soon as possible after the last act?" She assented promptly, and, as her cue was given, hurried on the stage, while Billy sat down to perfect the details of the plan which had come to him while talking with Aronson. At the close of the performance, he found that the manager had a carriage waiting at the stage door, and the three were soon seated at a corner table in a fashionable restaurant. Aronson, who had quite recovered his suave self-control, plunged at once into the matter in hand. In a chapter. Chapter 10. A New Star. "Mr. Stewart," said Aronson, "you have written a great play. It is just the kind of thing that is in demand now, a good play with a meaning. If it is put on in the right way and with the right cast, it will make a big hit. I say it, and I'm the best judge of these things in New York." "I believe that you are," admitted Billy, knowing that the assertion was indeed true. "Now, the way to put it on is this," the manager went on. "Get a good company, and especially get the best man and woman for your leading parts. The woman is most important, for your Helen Tudor is the feature part in the piece. Get a good company all around, and put them out for this winter on the circuit of the smaller cities, so that they may thoroughly learn the play. See it played yourself, note the effect on the audiences, and make any changes that may be necessary. Begin the advertising, and when the company and the play are both perfect, put on here." "See, your plan seems good to me," answered Billy, "and I believe that you are better equipped to carry it out than any other manager in the city. Now, here is my proposition. Mr. Aronson, I will get my play copyrighted at once and turn over the manuscript to you for the distribution of the parts among your company. We will go tomorrow to a lawyer of my selection who will draw up a contract specifying my royalty and so on. You will select the company, with one exception. Miss Jane will represent me, receive my profits, and have full power to act for me in every way. And she is to play the part of Helen Tudor. Miss Jane gasped in astonishment, and Aronson, after an instant, struck the table violently with his fist. "The very thing!" he shouted, so loudly as to draw all eyes upon them. "Why didn't I think of her before? Why, she lives up to the part already. She can give it better than any living woman. Esther, my dear, you'll make a sensation. It's a great part, and it was made especially for you." "Will you take it, Miss Jane?" asked Billy, seeing that she hesitated. "Please don't say no." "Do you realize," she said to him, "how much you are entrusting to me?" "I am entrusting more to you than you know of," he answered gravely, "and I am not at all afraid to do it. You forget that I know and believe in your philosophy of attainment." "I know nothing of the part beyond what Mr. Stewart told me a few days ago," she said to Aronson, "but I believe that I can play it, and if you give it to me, I will try." After some discussion of minor details, the matter was settled, and Billy took Miss Jane home, receiving her permission to call and read her the play on the following day. When she heard it, she was enthusiastic in its praise. "That is a splendid part," she said, "and I feel sure that I can give it a worthy interpretation and bring out your idea clearly. I thank you very much, Mr. Stewart, for the opportunity." "It is I who should thank you," he said. "What could I have done if you had not consented to act for me with Aronson? He is not to be trusted." "You have him fast now," she answered, "and he will try no more tricks with you. Do not judge all theatrical people by him, Mr. Stewart. Most of them are honest. And even Aronson, tricky as he is a kindly and generous man. He is the best manager to work for in the business. The receipts from your play will not be large on the Western Circuit, Mr. Stewart. You need expect only very small returns until it is brought out here." "And how soon do you think that will be?" asked Billy. "It will take until about the 1st of December to arrange the company, learn the piece, and route us. Then it takes about 3 months to make what we call the Great Circuit. Allowing for all delays and contingencies, we should be ready to commence here about the 1st of April. Billy's countenance showed some of the consternation he felt at this. "You are anxious to begin to get rich?" she said, smiling. "No, it isn't that. But the fact is, I have a reason for wanting quite a sum of money about the beginning of April, and I had hoped the play would do it. I mean, bring me the money. You have had some experience in these things, Miss Jane. Can you give me an estimate as to what my royalty might amount to on the Great Circuit?" "I know," she replied, after a moment's consideration, "about what the receipts of a company generally are. These things are matters of interest to all members of a company. Remember, Mr. Stewart, that your play is a new one, and we shall rely wholly upon stock advertising, and that audiences will often be small. I should think that in 3 months you might confidently expect to get $2,000. You would not be safe in putting your estimate higher than that." Billy turned pale. "Esther," said he, "I'm going to tell you all about it, if you care to listen. I need your help, anyway." She assured him of her interest and sympathy, and he told her the history of Nellie's trouble. "So you see," said he in conclusion, "that I must have $10,000 by the 10th of April, and it seems that the play isn't going to make it for me. Do you think, Miss Jane," she noted that he did not call her Esther again, "that Aronson would be willing to buy it outright for $10,000? "No," she said, "not now that he has your contract. He will try the play first. And furthermore, Billy," he thanked her by a look for using his name, and so showing her comradeship and sympathy, "you should not sell it if you would. It is worth much more than that. Didn't you tell me you believed in my philosophy of attainment?" "Yes, and so I do." "And you say you believe that your mother's faith is well-founded?" "Yes." "Then, you foolish boy, why do you get in a panic whenever you cannot see exactly how the thing you need is to come to you? Do you believe that the infinite is so limited as to ways that there is only one channel through which it can reach you? That isn't saving faith, Billy." He saw shining in her clear eyes the same unwavering faith that he had seen so often in his mother's, and his lip quivered, while his own eyes filled with tears. He took her hand and held it in his, stroking it softly for a moment, while he struggled for self-control. End of chapter. Chapter 11. Love. "Esther," said Billy, you see that I was right when I said that I needed your help. You'll have to furnish faith for me. And please let us be Esther and Billy from now on to the end of the chapter." "Go home, Billy," said she. "Get to work at some other great task, and have no fear. When we begin to rehearse the play, I will write you, and you can come on and see it." He took her advice, and the next morning found him in his pleasant workshop, quietly preparing for another undertaking while he enthusiastically described Miss Jane to his mother. "She's like what you must have been at her age, Mother," said he. "I couldn't give her higher praise than that, could I?" "I can imagine that you might," said she. "But, Billy, can you not see how your meeting her proves the truth of the philosophy she teaches? Is there not a power at work in our affairs, bringing the right person to the right place at the right time?" "It does look that way, Mother. I begin to see clearly that the Supreme is moving in all things toward more abundant life, and our part is to cooperate by faith. If we do that, and keep doing our very best with the means at hand, the help we need will always come in time. The car we want will always be just coming when we reach the corner, so to speak." "Yes, Billy, and if the car is not in sight, hold your faith without wavering, and someone will be sent for you with an automobile. No more panics for me, Mother. With such faith as yours and Miss Jane's to back him, a fellow must be a mighty poor stick if he lost his grip. The car will be there when we reach the corner." Aronson was slow in getting a company satisfactory to him, and it was well on toward the middle of December when Miss Jane wrote Billy to come to New York and see a rehearsal of his play. She waited until the company had worked upon the piece for a week and were getting their parts well in hand, for she wished the young author to get a fair idea of what a good production of his work would be like. Billy sat in the front of the house with Aronson, who had insisted that this rehearsal should be in costume and that the actors should give a full and spirited interpretation of their parts. As the rehearsal progressed, Billy became absorbed in watching Esther Jane. So powerful and thrilling was her impersonation of the heroine whose courageous faith surmounted every obstacle that he quite lost sight of the acting of her support, which was very good indeed, but which nevertheless seemed tame and commonplace by comparison with her. He saw at once that she had fully grasped his idea, and more, that she was getting very much out of the part that he had put into it. He watched her through the piece with absorbing interest, and at the close of the last act, he turned to Aronson with a sigh, like one awaking from sleep, and he was surprised to find the fat manager wiping tears from his eyes. "I'm a darn fool," said Aronson apologetically, his pronunciation suffering as it always did when he felt strongly. "But I can't help it. I always have to cry over such things. But you have a great play, Mr. Stewart, and that's a great girl. She's a darn sight bigger than the play." And Billy, with tears in his own eyes, wrung the man's hand and forgave him for all his rascality. And then he hurried behind the scene to find Esther Jane. "You have made my play a great thing," he said, clasping both her hands. "You get 100 times more out of it than I put into it. You are wonderful, Esther." "It is all in the part," she said. "You put the very fundamentals of life into it, Billy, and it plays itself when one understands and enters into the spirit of it. The play will be a great success, because you will make it so," said he. "Esther, I know now that I wrote that part for you. It was your splendid faith and courage that reached my mind and gave me the idea. All that is best in it is a picture of yourself. It is really your work more than mine. But now that I know you, I can write a play which will enable you to give the world what you are giving me. I shall commence work on it at once." He spent the rest of the day with her and went home in an exalted state of mind, beginning at once to outline a part which should enable her to express herself more fully. Preparations for the tour dragged provokingly, and it was after the holidays before the company finally took the road. Billy traveled with them for several days, critically studying his own work and noting its effect upon the audiences. He made some minor changes in the play and offered a few suggestions to members of the troupe, but in the main, he was satisfied with their interpretation of his thought. Esther's acting was superb and growing more perfect every night. The audiences were carried away with enthusiasm over her, and Billy rejoiced more in her success than in his own. When the time came for him to leave the company, he sought a private interview with her. "Esther," he said, holding her hands as they were about to say goodbye, "I am going to tell you something, and I do not want you to answer me. I love you, And I'm going to write a play for you that will be worthy of you and will show that I am as near worthy of you as any mere man could be. And when I have done that, I am going to ask you to marry me. I will not say that I love you, Billy, she said with sparkling eyes. But when you ask me that question, you may rely upon its receiving my respectful consideration. I think I'd better kiss you, said he. I think so too, said she. Too, said he. Thank you. He went home and plunged into his work with enthusiasm. The weeks slipped rapidly past. He received regularly a weekly letter and report from Esther, always telling the same story of the favorable reception of his play by the audiences and always breathing the same spirit of unwavering faith in him and his work, and in the ultimate happy outcome of all things for him, his family, and herself. They did not write of love, but their deep affection for each other was manifest in every word, notwithstanding, and Billy, after the manner of lovers, thought of little else than the wonderful new power which had come into his life. Then one day he wakened with a shock to a realization of the fact that it was the 1st of April, that the company was returning to New York, and that his royalties from the great circuit had only reached the sum of $2,500, and that for his gentle little sister, the penitentiary seemed inevitable. End of chapter. Chapter 12. Nevin. At the sound of the call for help, Gaylor scrambled up the bank of the gulch, which was about 50 feet high, and arriving on the top, he found a man lying flat on the ground. A trail in the loose sand, plainly visible in the bright moonlight, showed that the stranger had crawled or dragged himself out of the desert, which stretched for miles to the eastward. Seeing at once that the man was unable to walk, the young miner carried him down the steep slope to his cabin, and striking a light, proceeded to give him a hasty examination. He found him emaciated and worn almost to a skeleton by thirst and starvation, and suffering from an unhealed wound in the left breast. The stranger was evidently dying, and after giving him water, Gaylor was about to call assistance from the nearest shanty when the man beckoned him to stay. "Pard," he whispered hoarsely. "I'm going. I'll be gone before you get help. Map, pocket in my shirt. Right side, quick." Gaylor felt in the place indicated and found the map, a folded piece of paper, which he opened and held before the dying man. "I cashed $10,000 in gold dust." The man gasped. "The map shows where. Go to Reese's camp and show the map to Moqui Jim. He'll tell you what it means and go with you to the gold. My wife's name, address, and picture in pocketbook. Keep half yourself, give half to her. Be square with her, pard. You'll risk your life. I'm going." He fell back, and in a moment he was dead. Gaylor searched his clothing, and in an inside pocket found a wallet, and in this were letters from the man's wife, giving her address. He also found her picture, which showed her to be a comely, bouncing woman of 40 years and 200 pounds. He found by the letters that the dead man's name was Thomas Nevin. After carefully concealing the map, and also the letters and picture upon his own person, Gaylor hurried out to call the other miners. He gave them no information other than that the man had crawled to his cabin in a dying condition and had mentioned Reese's camp. They surmised that the poor fellow had tried to make a short cut across the desert, from Reese's to the railroad, and being wounded and driven out of his course by Indians, had crawled on, only to perish just as he reached a place of safety. They buried him the next morning and went on with their work. But after the others had gone, Gaylor, standing by the grave, apostrophized its occupant as follows: "Partner, I'm going to find this gold of yours, and if I do, your wife shall have her share. $5,000 will be half of what I must have by the 10th of April, and it may be that the same hand which guided you here will guide me to the other half. Yes, you came to the right man. I'll be square with your wife because I've quite lost the knack of dealing any other way. A lifetime of square living won't make right the wrong I've done to Nellie Stewart, but I'll do the best I can." He disposed of his few belongings in Briscoe's, as the camp was called, and 3 days later, tired and covered with dust from his long trip across the desert, he rode into Reese's camp, 100 miles away. He made the inquiry for Moqui Jim his first business and was pointed to a cabin on the outskirts of the camp, with the intimation that he would find the Indian an unsocial personage. He went to the cabin, and stepping up to the open door, found the man he sought sitting inside, smoking. "Ow," said Gaylor. The Indian grunted, without looking around to see who his visitor might be. Gaylor, who understood Indian nature well, stepped into the hut and drew forward the only other stool in the room, sitting down. He drew from his pocket the picture of Nevin's wife and laid it on Jim's knee, but the fellow smoked on stolidly. Then Gaylor unfolded the map and held it up before him, and a slight tightening of the muscles of the brown face showed that the Moqui saw what it was and understood. "Nevin is dead," said Gaylor. The Indian continued to smoke in silence. "He crawled to my cabin at Briscoe's 3 days ago," the young man went on, "dying and with a big knife wound in his breast. He gave me these and told me to come to you." He paused, but the Moqui gave no sign of having understood him. "He told me," Gaylor continued, "to find the gold and give half to his wife." He laid his finger on the picture, which still rested on the Indian's knee. "He said you would show me the cash. But what is it to you? Do you want some of the gold?" "No want anything," said the Indian gruffly. "I show you." "When?" "Start tomorrow." "How far?" 5 days desert, 5 days mountain. "Hard trip. No can take horses, pack grub and water." "All right," said Gaylor quietly. "We go. I'll get our packs, and we start early in the morning." The Indian grunted and began to smoke again, and Gaylor, knowing that it would be useless to try to get more information from him, arose and left the hut. Inquiries made about the camp only brought him the knowledge that Nevin and the Indian had come tramping in together a fortnight before, and that after a few days' rest, the white man had struck off across the desert, leaving the Moqui to await his return. Nothing was known as to whence they had come or what had been their previous history. Gaylor sold the pony he had ridden from Briscoe's and put the price with the $200 which were his savings from his winter's work, and which he carried in a belt about his waist. Acting on the hint given by Indian Jim, he provided 2 packs of provisions, making them as light as he dared, and he bought several canteens for carrying a supply of water across the desert. He took his purchases to the cabin and spread them before the Moqui, who inspected them keenly and in silence, and finally nodded, indicating that the preparations were complete. "Rifles?" asked Gaylor. "No. You revolver. Me knife. No game, no Indians, nothing to shoot." Gaylor packed his supplies again and lay down to sleep until their start in the early dawn. End of chapter. Chapter 13. Moqui Jim. A deep canyon, with precipitous walls of rock on either side. A swift, brawling stream of very cold water flowing through, winding among masses of fallen rock and the debris of floods which often dammed the stream into deep pools through which the traveler must wade or swim. No sign of life on any hand. A picture of loneliness, wildness, and desolation. Up this canyon, toilsomely making their way over the rocks and litter, wading and swimming the pools. Tired and worn by their 5 days' tramp across the burning desert, but still pushing grimly on, went Gaylor and Moqui Jim. They had entered the canyon on their 6th day out from Reese's camp, and had hidden 5 days' provisions and their water vessels in a cache among the rocks, ready for the return trip across the sands. And the Indian informed his companion that 4 more days of mountain climbing would bring them to their destination. During the whole trip, not a score of words had passed between them. The Indian was one of the most taciturn of his silent race, and Gaylor, occupied with his own thoughts, cared little for conversation. They toiled on until night was falling, and then arranged their camp on a flat rock against the eastern wall, which was perpendicular and more than 100 feet in height at that place. The Indian found enough dry driftwood to make a little fire, and Gaylor made coffee and cooked their supper, and then they sat on opposite sides of the fire, smoking and gazing at the embers. And as they sat thus, a strange accident befell them. Somewhere, many feet above them, a stone a little larger than a man's fist had become loosened, and now it fell, striking Moqui Jim just above the knee. He grasped his leg with a sharp exclamation, and then began to feel and manipulate it curiously. Then he leaned back against the rock and put his pipe between his lips again. "Hurt?" asked Gaylor sympathetically. "Bone broke." Gaylor leaped up with a startled look and hastily examined the Indian's limb, and found the bone fractured. He set to work instantly to find such sticks as might serve for splints, and to set and bandage the fracture while the light should last, making shift, when daylight failed him, to work by the light of the fire. The Indian yielded passively to his ministrations, smoking stolidly and occasionally offering a suggestion in a word or two as to the turn of a bandage or the position of a splint. It was late before the work was finished to the satisfaction of the amateur surgeon, and he lay down to sleep greatly perplexed as to what should be his course on the morrow. He lay awake most of the night and awoke from a short nap in the morning with his problem still unsettled. It was clearly impossible for the Indian to walk, and equally impossible for them to remain where they were if the one hope which had sent him on the trip was to be realized. He cooked the breakfast, cudgeling his brains in vain for a way out of the difficulty, and then sat down to confer with the Indian. "Suppose I fix you up here with firewood and grub to last till I get back," he said, "and I take the map and go on and get the gold?" "No good," said the Moqui. "No can find. You hunt month. Map no show. No good." "I expected as much," muttered Gaylor. The map was made to guide Nevin to his cache, but not to show it to anyone else. He turned to the Moqui again. "Look here, Jim," he said. "I got to get the gold and get it quick. There's a girl back east who is in trouble, and if I don't get there with this gold by the 10th of April, they will send her to the penitentiary for 20 years. "Hell," said the Indian with sudden and fearful vehemence. The young man looked at him in amazement. "Prison? Hell," said the Moqui. "You've been there. 1 year. Well, think of a poor little innocent girl going for 20 years. Can you see why I want this gold? How can we get it, Jim?" "No can stay here," said the Indian. "Sometime flood come, drown us." He pointed at the watermarks upon the sides of the canyon, and Gaylor understood that a sudden heavy rain in the mountains above might, at any time, fill the narrow gulch with a raging torrent from which they could not possibly escape. "No can go back across desert. Any better than go on," said the Moqui. "Tie up leg. Sometime you carry, sometime I hop. We go on." Gaylor set to work by tearing up his coat. Most of his shirt had gone into the bandage, to make a sling for the injured leg, and an hour later they started. Their progress was necessarily very slow. Sometimes the young man carried the Indian on his back, where the way was rough and obstructed by the smaller stones. Often an hour was spent in surmounting a single huge boulder or a dam of drift. Gaylor trying in every possible way to save his companion from injury or suffering. Where the way was smooth, they made good headway, for here the gallant Moqui hopped on one foot, steadying himself by laying a hand on his companion's shoulder. He bore his intense suffering like a hero, never uttering a groan or a word of complaint, and Gaylor could not help admiring him. The young fellow himself worked like a giant. He carried the other every day until the very limit of his strength was reached, falling half insensible upon his blanket as soon as he had cooked their supper and made the Indian as comfortable as possible for the night. 8 days were required to make what would ordinarily have been a 4 days' journey. But at the end of that time, they reached the cache and found the buckskin sack of gold which Nevin and the Indian had hidden a year before, expecting to return in a few weeks. Gaylor learned now that the tie which bound the Moqui to Nevin was one of gratitude, the miner having been the main agent in securing the Indian's release from prison, where he had been unjustly confined. Both men were completely exhausted when they reached the cache, and they rested for 2 whole days, and this brought them to the evening of the 20th of March. In a chapter. Chapter 14. "Ow! We'll have to start back in the morning," said Gaylor that night, as they sat smoking by the fire. "How can?" asked the Indian. "No can carry. Too damn far." "I've got to carry you," said the young man quietly. "It will be a hard proposition, I know, but it can be done, and I am going to do it." "Go alone," said the Moqui, "and leave you here? We haven't provisions enough. You would be dead before I could send help, and a flood might catch you any time." "Shoot 'em." "Shoot you? Not much. You have shown yourself a man clear through, and I'll stand by you to the finish." "No, Jim, you got into this by doing what you thought was the right thing, and we're going out together. You like girl?" He had asked many questions about Nellie, seeming strangely interested in her, and Gaylor had frankly told him the whole story. "I love her. I've been loving her more every day since I played the cursed scoundrel and got her into this trouble. Prison hell, said the Moqui, watching his face. Flog, dark cell, hang by thumbs. Hell. I know, said Gaylor with a groan. She mustn't go there. Great God. I got to get out to Reese's before the 10th of April. No, can shoot 'em. No, don't talk about it anymore. I'm going to sleep. We'll start in the morning, and we'll make it somehow. The Indian extended his hand, which Gaylor grasped, wondering a little at such an unusual display of feeling. You damn good man, said the Indian. How? And he lay back upon his blanket, as if to go to sleep. Just as the light of dawn began to fall into the canyon, the Indian rose cautiously to a sitting position and looked searchingly at Gaylor, who was sleeping soundly. Satisfying himself of this, the Moqui carefully crept over to where the young man's revolver was lying, within easy reach of his hand, and drawing it from the holster, worked his way laboriously back and concealed the weapon under the edge of his blanket. Then he spoke his companion's name. Fred. Gaylor sat up instantly and began to rub his eyes. What is it, Jim? He asked. Get water. Fever hot. Gaylor took up the frying pan, their only watertight vessel, and went toward the creek, passing out of sight behind a great boulder. As he did so, the Indian spoke his name again. Fred. Well, he answered, halting. Tell girl, Moqui Jim say how. She not go damn prison. And instantly came the sound of a pistol shot. Gaylor dropped the frying pan and ran back. The Moqui was dying. He had shot himself through the head. When day dawned, Gaylor buried the body as best he could, piling rocks about and upon it, and securing the gold in a belt about his waist, which also held the small results of his winter's work at Briscoe's, he started down the canyon. Think of that Indian killing himself to give me a chance to save Nellie, he said, as he hurried on, scrambling over the rocks and plunging through the pools. Well, she's going to be saved if it takes another life. At noon on the 5th day, he came to the place where they had entered the canyon and was shocked to find that their cache had been rifled and all their provisions and the canteens for carrying water carried away. Some wandering prospector, skirting the mountains, or some skulking Indian had found the place, and his 5 days' journey across the desert, if made at all, must be accomplished with neither food nor water. He climbed out of the canyon, which was shallow there, and looked at the mountains towering behind him, and then across the plain of burning sand, above which the hot air shimmered in the noonday sun. I'll wait until night, he thought, and then soak my clothes with water and start out. I'll travel nights and lie under a heap of sagebrush while the sun is hottest, and I'll make it. I got to. He crept back into the shades of the canyon and lay there until after sundown, and then set forth upon his desperate adventure. 5 days later, he staggered into Reese's camp, a skeleton, delirious and babbling of Moqui Jim, Nellie, and the penitentiary, and a miner took him into his cabin and put him into his own bunk, and several days passed before he recovered consciousness. Then one afternoon, he opened his eyes and looked into the bearded face above him with a gaze of intelligence. Reese's, he said. The miner nodded. How long? What date is this? The 4th of April. Good God, where's the belt I wore? You didn't wear any, pard, when you come in here. Was there no gold on me? Not a so marquee. End of chapter. Chapter 15. More Metaphysics. On the 4th day of April, the company which had been playing The Joy of Going On returned to New York City, and Billy Stewart hurried down to see Esther Jane. He found her tired but jubilant and prophesying unbounded success for the play when it should open in New York. Because of the lateness of the season, Aronson had decided to postpone the opening until fall. Esther rendered to Billy an account of her stewardship and gave him Aronson's check for $2,500. They were in her lodgings, and he sat holding the check in his hands and staring at it a little ruefully. I was to make $10,000 by the 10th of April, he said, and today is the 5th. I am only $7,500 short, Esther. Ah, but Billy, said she, you have made the money and more. The work you have done will bring you a great deal more than $10,000. And besides, Billy, we have $5,000 now. $5,000? How is that? I've been getting a leading lady's pay this trip, you know, and I had some money laid up besides. So here's my check for $2,500. She extended the check toward him, but he made no movement to take it from her fingers. He sat in silence for a moment, looking at her, with his face very much flushed. "Esther," he said slowly, "did you suppose I would take your money?" She brought her chair and sat down close beside him. "Billy," said she, "when you bid me goodbye, you said that you were going to ask me to marry you. So I am, sweetheart, and that right soon. You know the motto of modern business," she said, is what? Do it now. What followed is outside the scope of this chronicle. It is enough to say that Billy proved himself to be far from slothful in business. An hour later, she said, referring to the check which she still held in her hand, "Now, Billy, can you give me any good reason for refusing this?" He considered for a moment. "No," he said, and took it. "Now," she went on, "please listen to me a moment. We have $5,000, and we could raise the other $5,000 we need in either of several ways. You could borrow it from Aronson, giving him security on the royalties which will come to you next fall, or he would advance it to me on a contract for another year. And again, what manner of man is this Mr. Packett, Billy? An honest, inflexible, merciless money grabber. If you were to go to him with $5,000 and give him proof that the other $5,000 will be paid within another year, do you think he would prosecute your sister?" "He loves money more than anything," said Billy. "And if he sends Nellie to prison, all his hope of getting another $5,000 will be gone. I've been thinking of that. And if I know Packett, he will never lose $5,000 for the mere satisfaction, if it is a satisfaction, of sending a girl to jail. There is something mysterious about this whole business, something in his action that I do not understand. I do not believe that he had the slightest idea that we could raise the money, but I cannot conceive of him as rejecting what would practically be an offer of $5,000. "I mentioned it," said Esther, "because I knew that it was in your mind. But we are not going to do it, Billy dear. We are not going to ask Mr. Packett's mercy, nor are we going to mortgage our future to Aronson or to anyone else. Then what the dickens are we going to do? Billy, I want you to take me home with you for a few days. I want to meet your mother and sister and fall in love with them. And I want you to go quietly on with your affairs until next Wednesday, the 10th. And if $5,000 should be all the money we have on that day, I want you to take it an hour before the bank closes and go there with the full assurance that the whole amount will be paid. Where will it come from, Esther? I haven't the least idea, but it will come. And I am not to take any steps to provide against a possible failure. I am to risk Nellie's fate wholly on faith. Did you not tell me once that you believed in faith?" "Yes, but how do you know but that one of these other ways we have mentioned has been appointed by the Supreme Intelligence to be the one we shall use?" "Because they are all wrong, Billy. It is wrong to borrow money and mortgage your future. It is never necessary to those who are in unison, by faith, with the great abundance. And it is wrong for you to ask for mercy. In the providence of God, the time for payment has been set for next Wednesday, and if we have faith and doubt not, it will be paid to the uttermost farthing." The confident ring of her voice thrilled him strangely. He kissed her with tears in his eyes. "Oh, woman, great is thy faith," said he. "But, Esther, suppose it is the will of the Supreme that Nellie should go to prison? The best, the holiest, and the most innocent men and women have met sorrow and suffered martyrdom. Why not again?" "It is not his will that any should suffer," she answered. "God never sends sickness, poverty, or suffering, Billy. These things are caused by our imperfect knowledge of the truth and our lack of faith. It is not necessary for those who seek the good to be poor, or to suffer imprisonment or martyrdom. If they have done so in the past, it was because of a misconception, because they did not understand him whose work they sought to do. Billy, ought not the best people in the world be the wealthiest, healthiest, and happiest people in the world? Sure, but they aren't. No, they are not. And yet God gives his bounties of health and wealth without stint to all. Do you not see, Billy, that men limit what they have and what they are by their limited thought, by their littleness of faith? I fully catch your idea, Esther, and I see the force of your reasoning, and I can give my intellectual assent to it, even if I haven't a living faith like yours. Come home with me, and stay until after Wednesday with my mother and sister, and if your faith, joined with my mother's, doesn't bring victory, I'll say there's nothing in the whole thing. So the evening train took them both to Linton. End of chapter. Chapter 16. Mr. Langham. In the same afternoon in which Billy and Esther had the conversation recorded in the previous chapter, Mrs. Stewart received a caller in Linton. Mr. Langham, Nellie's employer, was, as we have said, 40 years old, a widower and wealthy, and a very much respected man. He called at the cottage while Nellie was at the store, and expressing his pleasure at finding her mother alone, proceeded at once to state the object of his visit. "I love your daughter, Mrs. Stewart," said he. "I know that I am much older than she, as years go, but not in heart. I do not think that I am altogether an unfit mate for her. I do not need to speak to you of my means, or of my character and standing as a man. Those things you know all about. But I am going to ask Nellie to marry me, and I feel that it is right to lay the matter before you first. And there's a question I wish to ask." "What is your question, Mr. Langham?" she inquired. "For some months I have tried, in one way or another, to convey to Nellie some hint of my feelings toward her, and she manages to repulse me, gently, but decidedly. Now, I wish to ask you if she is engaged to marry anyone else. I am afraid, Mr. Langham, that she loves—" "My dear Mrs. Stewart, you misunderstand me. I do not seek to learn whether she loves another man, but whether she is engaged to marry him. In the latter case, I should consider the matter decided, and feel that it would be wrong for me to interfere. But in the former, I should not be out of the running until she had made her final decision." "She was engaged," said Mrs. Stewart slowly, "to marry Mr. Gaylor. I suspected as much, but he left town suddenly, and it does not appear that anyone knows where he went or why. Now, if she is keeping up a correspondence with him, and intends to marry him, the matter is settled so far as I am concerned. That is exactly what I wish to ascertain." "I do not think," said Mrs. Stewart, "that she hopes to marry him. She has never received a letter from him, and does not know where he is." "But she loves him, Mr. Langham." "That," said he, "is not an insurmountable barrier, Mrs. Stewart. I love my wife, and I love Nellie. It may be that she can be made to love me. Love is not sent to us by a power outside ourselves. It must be won. I'm going to try to win your daughter's love, and I hope, at least, to have your best wishes for my success." Mrs. Stewart was silent for a moment, as the thought came to her with overwhelming force that by accepting this man's proposal, Nellie might find peace and safety. She felt that she had only to tell him the situation to ensure his prompt and effective action, that he would pay Packett in full and destroy the confession, and that he would gladly take the girl to his heart and home, forgiving her error for the sake of her love. The widow knew enough of Langham's splendid character to feel certain that he would love and cherish Nellie with added tenderness because of what she had done, and she felt, also, that her influence over her daughter was sufficient to cause her to accept the merchant, even though some struggle might be required. She thought of public disgrace and the penitentiary as possible alternatives, and for an instant, she was tempted, but only for an instant. "You certainly have my best wishes in every way, Mr. Langham," she answered him, "but I can offer you no hope. Nellie loves Gaylor, and while it does not appear likely that she will see him again, it would be wrong for her to marry you. Indeed, she could not marry you, for real marriage is a thing of the soul, and not of the body. And, however, two people may be united in body, if they are divided in mind, they are not really married." "I quite agree with you," said he, "and I propose to set to work to unite her mind to mine before I ask her to marry me." "Did you ever run across Swedenborg's definition of marriage, Mrs. Stewart?" "I do not remember it, if I have. He says that those people are really married who are united interiorly by marriage love, as well as exteriorly by law. I think that is a good definition, covering the whole matter. Now, if I can unite Nellie to me interiorly by marriage love, it would be right to unite her to me exteriorly by law, would it not? And indeed, it would be wrong not to do so." "I believe that it would." "Exactly. Now, marriage love is created by the process called courtship, and courtship consists in so impressing the mind of another with one's personality as to bring the response of love. Marriage love is the response of a woman's soul to the impression made by a man's personality, and of a man's soul to the impression made by the personality of a woman. Do you agree with me? Yes, sir, perfectly. I'm going into all this, Mrs. Stewart, because I wish you to exactly understand my position in the matter. Marriage love cannot be given at will, nor because of obligation. A woman cannot love her husband merely because he is her husband or because she promised to do so at the altar. If she loved him, it must be because he wins her love, and if she continues to love him, it must be because he continues to win her love. Right there is where many married couples fail. They cease, after the ceremony, to try to win love, relying on obligation. Each feels that the other ought to continue to love, whether the love is won or not. But it is a fact that the man who has won a woman's heart can retain full possession of it only by continuing to win it to the end of the chapter, and vice versa. And this can be done only by continuous self-development, by continually going forward. There is no limit to the possibility of unfoldment. We can so live that those around us can find more in us every day that is lovable. An appreciation of this fact would make most marriages happy. You are certainly right. Now, Mrs. Stewart, I have no doubt that Nellie loves Mr. Gaylor very much, but since she is not definitely engaged to him, I have a perfect right to try to make her love me more. I shall try to win her, and in that, as I have said, I ask only your good wishes. You certainly have them, Mr. Langham, aside from the disparity in your ages, and that is a very small matter. I know of no man to whom I would rather give my daughter. He thanked her and went away. And as she watched him going up the street, brisk, erect, confident, she thought again of Packett and his possible action. It would be wrong for Nellie to marry him when her heart is Gaylord's, she said aloud. And God does not require us to do wrong. He will provide, and my darling shall be left free to make her own choice. End of chapter. Chapter 17. Jason Packett. Billy brought Esther Jane home with him that night, and the mother received her son's betrothed wife with open arms. The two women understood each other from the first, and Nellie was completely captivated by the splendid personality of the actress. None of the four displayed any uneasiness or perturbation over the near approach of the momentous 10th of April. During the next 3 days, Billy worked quietly on his new play, which was being especially planned to give full scope to the wonderful talents of the woman he loved. He declared that her presence in the cottage gave him new inspiration, and that in those few days the best of all his work was accomplished. Nellie went every day to her work in Langham's store, and Mrs. Stewart and Esther passed the time most pleasantly in each other's society, each being a new revelation of faith and power to the other. And in spending these hours together, the bond of sympathy and affection between them grew very strong indeed. It was on the afternoon of Tuesday, the 9th of April. Billy was in his workshop and Nellie at the store, while Esther and Mrs. Stewart sat together in the pleasant sitting room. They heard the gate latch click, and looking from the window, saw Mr. Jason Packett coming to the door. Esther, not knowing who he was, slipped upstairs to Billy, and Mrs. Stewart, remembering the note she had received months before and divining the object of his visit, admitted the banker and, after courteously relieving him of his hat and coat, gave him a chair. She sat down before him, and after some inconsequential remarks about the weather, awaited a statement of his business. Mr. Packett was a spare man of light complexion, with reddish hair and mutton chop whiskers. In looking at him, one invariably thought of foxes. He was always neatly dressed and spoke in a quiet way. Rarely, indeed, was he betrayed into loud or angry speech. He seemed a little at a loss now to know just how to begin what he had come to say, but at last he came straight to the point. "Has Nellie made any progress," he asked, "toward raising the money to pay back what she took from me?" The question was brutally direct, but the widow smiled, looking him steadily in the face. "Yes," she said, "she has made great progress." He was evidently somewhat taken aback. He hesitated, coughed, and then asked dryly, "How much?" "She has $5,000 ready to pay you." He was greatly astonished, for he had not thought it possible for the family to raise so large a sum. Billy had taken no one into his confidence, and no one in Linton knew that he had written a play. And had they known it, the knowledge would have meant little to the townspeople, most of whom had no very exalted conception of the value of dramatic literature. Packett had been watching quietly, wondering what the young man might be doing. He had thought that he might be offered a few $100s, but the statement that half the entire amount was ready for him, taken in connection with the calm and assured manner of the mother, staggered him. $5,000, said he, after a moment's silence. But that is only half, you know. She took 10,000. What about the other half, Marcia? He did not often call her Mrs. Stewart. They had gone to school together. It will be ready for you tomorrow, if it is required to save Nellie from prison. He stared. It will be ready, he said incredulously. How do you know? Where is it coming from? I do not know. I did not know where the first $5,000 was coming from, but it came, and I know that whatever we need will come. Might I ask you where the first 5,000 had come from? There is no reason why I should not tell you. Half of it Billy received as royalties upon a play he has written, and the other half was loaned him by a friend. Packett's face cleared. He began to see his way clearly. So then, said he, $2, 500 is really all that you have gained of the amount. And that was by a lucky fluke. Billy might work a long time before he would produce another play which would pay so well, if what I have been told about such things is true. And you have really no definite prospect of getting any more money. Marcia, I gave Nellie a year's time because you and I went to school together, and I wanted to do the best I could for all of you. It was compounding a felony, and I've laid myself liable to a criminal prosecution in doing it. I can't do it again. The matter must be settled tomorrow. It will be settled, Jason, she answered quietly. Oh, come, said he. I hope you are not going to put your trust in the possibility of a miracle. $5,000 are not going to drop into your lap through the ceiling. Marcia, and this is a pretty serious business. Think what it means to Nellie if it is made public, everlasting disgrace, and a long term in the penitentiary. All will be well with Nellie, said the mother. No harm can come to her. Divine love will surround my child and keep her safe. Divine love may be all right as far as it goes, answered he. But in case of need, Marcia, I have found banknotes more trustworthy. I am not making light of your religion, but this is a case in which a very large sum of money must be secured, and in a few hours. And you don't mean to tell me that you seriously expect $5,000 to come to you from nowhere in particular before tomorrow noon? We have until closing time for your bank, 3 o'clock, she reminded him. Yes, Jason, I know that whatever is necessary to us will come. Well, that's another matter. Whatever is necessary may come, but the money won't. And one of two things must be done. Either the money must be raised, or you and I must come to some terms. Now, if I should make you a proposition, how would you know but that it might be divine love offering you a way out? Couldn't it be possible that divine wisdom sees a better settlement for all this than by paying the cash? It might be possible, she admitted. I do not insist that the money will come, but that whatever is necessary to save Nellie from unmerited suffering will come. And I feel that she has suffered and will suffer enough without publicity and imprisonment. Yes, the way might lie through a proposition from you. She waited, having a premonition of what his offer was to be. Exactly, said he. Well, I wrote you my proposition months ago. I wanted to give you time to consider it well. I'm 50 years old, Marcia, and a well-preserved and healthy man. I've lived alone all my life because I never had time to think of getting married or of anything else but making money. But I've got enough now, and I'm getting tired and lonely. I want to quit business and enjoy life a little. You're a handsome woman, Marcia, and a capable one. We could get along well together. Now, you marry me tomorrow, and we'll burn Nellie's confession. Billy may keep the money he has, and the whole thing will be settled. End of chapter. Chapter 18. The Trial of Faith. As Packett spoke, the widow lifted her eyes to the portrait of her dead husband, which hung upon the wall, and now they dropped to the sharp countenance before her, lined and seamed by years of avarice and money cunning, and a great wave of repulsion swept over her. Seeing that she was about to speak, he checked her, holding up his hand. Wait till I get through, he said. I want you to hear all the arguments before you decide. I've never been a ladies' man, Marcia, and I know you don't care for me in a marrying way. I care for you, though, and I've had my eye on you for a long time. I would have asked you 30 years ago if George," he lifted his eyes in turn to the picture, "hadn't got ahead of me. Since he died, I've been thinking about it. But I knew it was no use until this thing happened, and then I saw my chance, and I took advantage of it on the instant." She comprehended now that he had meant from the first to force her into a marriage with him, and the disgust she felt was visible in her face, but he was oblivious to it. "I want you," he went on. "I don't know much about this new religion you've got, but from what I do know, it strikes me favorably. There is something about you that lifts me up and makes me want to get on a different plane, to do more, and to be more, and you can help me. I want to be like you, if I can, and to have what I see in you. And you know me well enough to know that I will keep my word when I say that if you marry me, I will do my very best to raise myself to your level. You've got something that's more than money, and I want it. It may be this divine love you trust, and that's moving me. But whatever it is that you have which sets you so above the rest of us, I want it. And I put it to you, apart from all other considerations, whether you ought not to help me." "Do you think, Jason," she said gently, "that the first step toward getting on a higher plane should be to force a woman to marry you who does not love you?" "Well, now," he replied, "as to that, how many people at our time of life marry for love, and how many for convenience, for money, for a home, for congenial companionship? Isn't it a fact that people around us marry, for various economic reasons, every day? Nothing wrong in it, is there?" "It does not seem right to me," she said. "And suppose I reject your proposition, Jason?" "Well," said he, "if you don't care enough for Nellie yourself to go out of your way to save her, you cannot expect me to go out of my way to do it. If you refuse me, Marcia, I shall give the confession to the prosecuting attorney, and let the law take its course. Do you think the mercy you show my daughter should induce me to marry you? Well, now, it isn't me that's showing or denying mercy. It's you. If you want to put it that way, you can show mercy to yourself and send Nellie to prison, or you can show mercy to Nellie and me and make the sacrifice yourself. Honestly, Marcia, I'll try to make it pleasant for you if you take me. And if you don't, the law must have its way. If the $10,000 are not in my hands at 3 o'clock tomorrow, Nellie will be arrested before sundown." Looking into his eyes, she did not doubt that he meant exactly what he said, and for an instant her faith wavered, and she hesitated. Again, an unspeakable loathing filled her soul at the thought of marriage with the man before her, and she rose to her feet and faced him steadily. "Jason Packett," said she, "may God forgive me, for I hoped never to come so near to hating any of his creatures as I am now, to hating you. Much as I abhor the thought of it, I would marry you if I believed that God required such a sacrifice of me to save my daughter, or if I thought he required it for your own sake. But I do not believe it. Divine love will not require me to pollute myself to save Nellie, nor is it required in order that you may become a better man. It would not be right for me to marry you, and I will not. I trust in God. Go back to your bank. The money will be ready for you tomorrow." His face turned pale with anger, for he saw that she spoke with final decision. "Well, you leave it with God," said he through his shut teeth. "And if God don't send the money, I shall take it that he wants the girl to go to jail." He took his light overcoat from the wall where she had hung it, and pressing his hat savagely down upon his head, went out, slamming the door behind him. She stood for an instant looking after him, with a pale and agitated face, and then, hearing the door of Billy's workroom close, she turned and hurried to her own bedroom, and locked herself in. For as Packett left the house, a great horror of doubt had come upon her, and she felt that she must be alone. She threw herself upon the bed, burying her face in the pillow, and for the first time since her husband's death burst into bitter weeping. "Oh, God," she gasped, "what if it should fail? What if it is all a mistake? How do I know what God requires? Am I selfishly dooming my child to save myself? Oh, God, guide me right," she sobbed aloud, and lay with clenched hands in an agony of doubt and fear. She thought of Nellie, her gentle and winsome daughter, and tried to picture her among the horrors she had heard of as existing in the prison, and the thought was agony unspeakable. She knew beyond a doubt that Packett would carry out his threat and give the confession to the prosecutor if the full amount was not in his hands at the time he had set. And she had rejected the certainty of safety and trusted all to a power which now, in the sudden agony of her loving fear, seemed strangely mystical and unreal. Would the Supreme fail her? She had trusted, she had believed, she had done her best. But would it answer in her hour of need? A wild impulse to spring up, to run after Packett and accept his offer came to her with almost overpowering force. And so for hours she lay, going through the very valley of the shadow of death and the faltering of the faith which had been her staff for years. Once Billy came and rapped upon the door, but she bade him in a muffled voice to leave her alone for a little while. And he went away, wondering greatly what could have happened to her. Night was falling before she recovered her self-control, and then she began to repeat the affirmations of truth which were part of her daily mental work, and upon which she based her faith. Nellie, coming home from work, crept to the bedroom door to listen, and after a moment slipped noiselessly away, for she heard her mother repeating over and over in low tones, but with passionate earnestness, "There is one mind, and I am that mind. That mind is the source of all power, and cannot know doubt nor fear. I am that mind, and I am peace and power. All things created and uncreated are in that mind. I am that mind, and I can know no lack." Nellie and Esther prepared supper, and when it was ready Mrs. Stewart came forth from her room, a little paler than usual, but serene and calm. Her faith had won the victory. They passed the evening in pleasant conversation upon general topics, and went early to bed. End of chapter. Chapter 19. The 10th of April. Next morning, as they sat for their usual few minutes' conversation before separating to take up the work of the day, Billy said, "Well, the great day has come. I'm going down to the other bank this morning to get these checks in a cash, so that I may have the genuine legal tender to offer Packett, and then I'm going right on with my work, as usual. If the other 5,000 doesn't arrive before 2 o'clock, I shall take what I have and start for the bank in the faith that I shall find it waiting for me there. Is that the way to do it, you teachers of metaphysical science?" He looked from his mother to Esther for a reply. "That is the way," said Esther quietly. Mrs. Stewart nodded her head and added, "There is something, children, which I think I had better tell you." And she told them first of Mr. Langham's visit and his proposal for Nellie's hand. "I am not violating his confidence in telling it," she said, "for he makes no secret of his determination to win Nellie's love if he can. I tell you, because I wish to confess that for a moment my faith was tried. But I know that it would not be right for Nellie to marry him if she does not love him, and I know that the Supreme does not and cannot require us to do wrong. So I cannot promise him that I would influence her mind in any way." "I love Frederick Gaylor," said Nellie simply, "and I know that somewhere he's trying to make right what he has done. I will wait for him." Last night, the mother went on, my faith was tried again, and she told them of Packett's offer of marriage and his threat, of the sudden fear that had come upon her, and of the struggle she had undergone. Billy was disposed to be angry, and he was secretly alarmed, also, for he felt that the banker would be merciless and would accept no compromise. He thought of telegraphing to Aronson and offering to pledge the royalties of his play if the manager would wire him an order for the money. But he felt that it would be impossible to make an adequate explanation, and it was impossible to perfect such an arrangement, either by wire or telephone. It was too late, and he could only fall back upon whatever comfort he might draw from the faith and assurance of Esther and his mother, and await the issue of the afternoon. But he did little work that morning, and at 2 o'clock, with $5,000 in a wallet in the breast pocket of his coat, he started for Packett's bank with an anxious heart. Though so early in the season, the day was warm, and as he came up beside the bank, he noticed that a window was open, and he heard the unusual sound of Packett's voice, lifted as if in anger. He hesitated, for he wished to see the banker alone, and, glancing through the window, saw that the room was empty, save for the banker and a stranger who stood outside the cashier's wicket. The stranger was a young man and presented the appearance of one recovering from a severe illness. His cheeks were hollow and his eyes sunken, while his clothes hung loosely upon his emaciated form. But at sight of his face, Billy's heart gave a great leap, for he recognized him instantly. He had met Fred Gaylord once, when home on a vacation, and it was Gaylord who stood before him. Holding his breath, he stepped close to the window and listened, being unperceived by either of the men in the room. "Confession be damned," said Gaylord hotly. "There isn't a word of truth in that confession. I stole the money myself, and Nellie knew nothing about it until I told her before I ran away, and then she took it upon herself. She did it to save me." "If you took the money," said Packett, "how did you do it?" "I don't propose to tell. Why should I give away my methods? I took it. That's all you need to know." Billy comprehended instantly that Gaylord was trying to clear Nellie by assuming the whole guilt himself, and he drew close to the window and listened with intense interest. "You can't make that work," said Packett. "The money was in the safe, and no one had access to it but the girl. It is impossible that you should have taken it without her help." "You can't prove that," said Gaylord. "Bank sneaks have taken money 1,000 times when everybody was ready to swear that it was impossible for them to get it. If I swear that I sneaked in and got the cash when your back was turned for a moment, you can't disprove it. The girl's confession disproves it, and you and I both know that she told the truth when she confessed to me. Look here, Packett, what good will it do you to send that poor girl to prison? In any case, I am the really guilty one. You know that. I came back to surrender myself and make what reparation I could. I did not know that confession was in existence until you told me so just now. Let me tear it up, and you may dictate any kind of confession to me. I'll sign it and take the consequences. My God, man, you won't send that poor child to a place like the penitentiary." "It will be you who have sent her there," Packett answered. "How much sympathy did you show for her when you led her into this?" Gaylord bowed his head. "I know that's true," said he, "and I've been through hell trying to atone for it." He placed his hand on a pile of bills which lay on the counter before him. "There's $5,000 here, as I told you," he went on, "and a better man than either you or I laid down his life to enable me to get here today with it. I crawled for 5 days across the desert with the sand choking me at night and the sun roasting me alive by day. 5 days without a drop of water. Look at me." He held up one of his claw-like hands. "And you can see that I've suffered. Packett, you say that you told the girl she could have the confession by giving you your money. Here's half of it. Now give me the paper, and we'll never mention this part of it. You can send me up for the whole amount." Packett shook his head obstinately. "It's a matter for the court," said he. "I've no right to interfere with justice. I shall take the paper to the prosecuting attorney and let him do his duty. The law must be enforced." "The law," said Gaylord. "I know how much you really care for either justice or law, where your own interests are concerned. Packett, you've got some motive in destroying that girl that I do not understand. It isn't in your nature to refuse $5,000 out of mere regard for a legal technicality." Packett flushed. "Have it as you like," he snarled. "She shall pay the penalty of her crime, anyway, and so shall you." "Packett," said Gaylord slowly, "I am a desperate man. Nellie is not going to prison. She is not going to be disgraced. Will you take this money and give me the paper?" Billy saw the young man's right hand stealing toward his hip pocket and guessed the purpose that had taken form in his mind, and he saw that it was time for him to interfere. "Wait, Gaylord," he said quietly, "that won't be necessary," and putting his hand upon the windowsill, he sprang into the room. Fortunately, there were but few people on the street, and no one saw the action, else it might have aroused suspicion as to his intentions. End of chapter. Chapter 20. Faith Triumphant. "Mr. Packett," said Billy sharply, "your agreement with my sister was that if she paid you $10,000 today, you would deliver up to her a certain paper which you compelled her to sign just a year ago. Here is your money." He drew out his wallet and added its contents to Gaylord's pile of bills. "And I demand the paper. And by the way, why didn't you mention, Mr. Gaylord, that you were looking for me to drop in with $5,000? Packett hesitated. "How do I know this money is all genuine?" he said, with a suspicious glance at Gaylord. "Count and examine it," said Billy, pushing it through the window. "And be quick about it. We want to get this matter settled before anyone comes in." Packett made no move to touch the money. He had set his heart on forcing Marcia Stewart to marry him. And, like most stubborn men, the object he sought grew more important to him in the hour of defeat. "I have my doubts," said he, whether I have any right to take that money, and I shall not do it. A crime has been committed, and the law must take its course. That is, unless—" He broke off with a gasp of terror, for Gaylord, with remarkably quick and cat-like action, had leaped up and caught the top of the wire partition. He drew his slender body up, and in an instant more had dropped to a place at Packett's elbow, and a revolver was in his hand. "Give up the paper," he growled. "Quick, damn you!" And after one glance into his burning eyes, the banker drew a paper from an inside pocket of his vest and, with a trembling hand, passed it to Billy. The young man examined it hastily. "It's all right," he said to Gaylord. "We have it at last. Come out, Fred. You're in bad company." Gaylord unlocked the door at his side and joined Billy in front of the screen. Packett looked at them, showing his teeth in an angry grin. "I suppose you think you have me now," he said. "But what's to prevent me from bringing the matter before the prosecutor, even yet? I do not need that written confession." "What matter do you refer to, Mr. Packett?" asked Gaylord. "The robbery of my bank." "Has your bank been robbed? How can you prove it? Didn't you confess to me, not 20 minutes ago, that you robbed it yourself?" "My dear Mr. Packett, you have been dreaming. I robbed your bank." "Why? I can prove that I haven't been in town for a year, and you don't assert that you expect anyone who knows you to believe that you have been robbed and kept it secret for a whole year, do you?" "And Mr. Packett," said Billy, "as to a certain proposition you made my mother yesterday, let me suggest to you that a repetition of it will bring you one of the finest thrashings any man ever received in this world, and govern yourself accordingly." The young men left the bank together, and once in the street, Billy turned toward home, while Gaylord was about to move away in the opposite direction. "Here," said Billy. "Where are you going?" "To get out of town without being seen, if I can," replied the other. "So far, no one has recognized me but yourself and Packett. Goodbye." "Hold on," said Billy, catching him by the arm. "You can't get off as easily as that." "No," he added as the other seemed inclined to wrest away from his grasp. "You little bag of bones, you can't shake me off. You're coming home with me. I'm going to turn you over to my mother and let her do as she likes with you." "Anything but that," gasped Gaylord, with an agonized face. "My God, Stewart, I can't face Nellie." "Come on," said Billy, dragging him along. And seeing the futility of resistance, the other yielded and walked beside him with hanging head. When they arrived at the cottage, Mrs. Stewart received Gaylord with no outward manifestation of surprise, greeting him as if nothing had happened, and after introducing him to Esther and frankly explaining her relationship to them, Billy sat the guest down in an easy chair and demanded his story. "I found him at the bank, Mother," he explained, "trying to get Packett to take his $5,000 and send him to the penitentiary. And between us, we made the old fox surrender the confession, although he hated to do it, even on receipt of his money. And now I want Gaylord to give an account of himself, and then you and Esther shall decide what is to be done with him. Go on now and give us the whole story." So Gaylord began his story with the moment of his leaving Linton, telling of the weeks of gambling and dissipation in which he had spent the stolen money, and then he described his sudden awakening and the complete change of heart which had come to him in the southern city. Here, Mrs. Stewart interrupted him and told him of Nellie's nightly prayers and affirmations made for him, at which he broke down and was for some time quite unable to proceed. Recovering his composure, he told of his labors at Reese's camp and of the coming of Nevin, of his terrible struggle on the journey up the canyon, and of the suicide of Moqui Jim and his message to Nellie. "Tell girl Moqui Jim say how she not go damn prison." He wiped tears from his eyes as he related this, and his hearers were greatly moved. "I wouldn't have minded knowing that Indian," muttered Billy. "There is only one mind," said Mrs. Stewart softly. "One divine, who lives in all." Gaylord went on to describe his horrible sufferings in the desert, and his despair when, on recovering consciousness in the miner's cabin, he was told that the gold was gone. "There was something crooked in the fellow's eyes," he said, "and it flashed upon me that he had taken the gold himself. Toward evening, when he went out, I crawled out of the bunk and found my revolver, and when he came in and sat down at the table, I sat on the opposite side and shoved the pistol under his nose. I made him keep his hands on the table while I told him the whole story, and I told him I must have my gold. 'Sure, pard,' he said, 'I might rob a man, but no girl goes to jail on my account, and he got the belt from where he had hidden it. I hired him to get a couple of ponies and help me to the railroad. And on the way here, I dropped off between trains to give $5,000 to Nevin's wife. I had my mind fully made up to offer Packett the $5,000. And if he refused to give me more time, to confess to having stolen the combination and burglarized the safe, and declare that Nellie had told an untruth to screen me. I did not know of the written confession until he told me of it. Then I determined to get it at any cost. I would have had it in another instant, when Billy interrupted us. So that's the story. His head fell forward, and he was silent, not lifting his eyes to their faces. Esther made an imperative sign to Billy, and he sprang up with outstretched hand. "I can read the decision of the court in Mother's eyes," he said, "and I'll carry out my part of it right now. Shake hands, Fred, and remember, will you, that my acquaintance with you begins at the time you were carrying that Indian up the canyon. I don't choose to remember further back than that. By thunder, it was a splendid thing. I'm proud of you." Gaylor tried in vain to speak as he grasped the proffered hand. Mrs. Stewart kissed him, saying quietly, "God bless you, my son. You have fought a great fight and have won a splendid victory." Esther was not less warm in expressing her admiration for his brave struggle against circumstances, and the poor fellow broke down again. "But Nellie," he said, after a few moments, "do you really think she can care for me after all of it?" "You'll soon know," said Billy, hearing the gate latch click, "for here she comes." They were startled, not realizing that time had passed so rapidly and that her day at the store was finished. She came in as Billy finished speaking, pausing in the hallway to remove her hat. "Well," she called out gaily, "faith must have triumphed and the money been received, for I haven't been arrested." "Yes," Billy answered promptly. "All's well, little girl." She stepped into the room, glancing first at the smiling faces of her mother and Esther, who sat together on the sofa, clasping each other's hands, and something she saw in their countenances led her to look quickly to where Gaylord sat, with the light from the window falling full upon his haggard face. She gazed for a moment, incredulously, and then, springing across the room, she knelt upon a footstool at his side and drew his head upon her shoulder. "Fred," she cried. "Oh, Fred, you poor dear boy, what have they done to you?" The divine pity and tenderness of woman for fallen man shone in her face. The brooding love of mother, wife, and sister. And Gaylord, resigning himself to her clasp, sobbed aloud, while Billy, looking from one to another of the three shining faces before him, muttered chokingly, "Oh, woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt." End of chapter. End of book.